Okay, welcome to part number 4. Okay, like a lot of other things in life, as things start getting a little bit more interesting, unfortunately, things get a little bit more complicated. So that is definitely the case of this one. Okay, and you can see what I've got here on the screen already is something called an autocomplete. Okay, and these things, I know that you've seen these types of things before on the internet. There are places where you can go and you can start typing something into an input box. Like if I start to type the word Java, for example, suddenly a whole bunch of other things start to appear, like Java and JavaScript. So it's called an autocomplete. What I want to do is I want to walk you through not exactly the autocomplete, but we're going to build something so at least you get the idea about how these work, and we're going to fit it within the context of my flexible input that we tried making up earlier. Okay, so um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to start with this one. So I'm going to walk you through this, and then there's going to be a small exercise for you guys to make a slightly different version of this, a much easier one than the one I'm about to show. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this a selection list. Okay, and once again, it's going to extend one of these things called a flexible input. Okay, and the way this is going to work in my case is I would really like to be able to come here, see this, click on it, and get a list of items appearing here that I can then click on to pick. Okay, so that's what we're going to be working towards. Okay, so first of all, just like the previous one, I am definitely going to have an input. Okay, and once again, I'm also going to have a constructor. Okay, so let's have a constructor. It's definitely going to have an ELT, and we'll also have one of those value change handlers, and we're going to do the same thing as before. We'll call our parents constructor along with the ELT and VCH, and we'll do the same thing as last time. Document is equal to input is equal to document create element. Once again, we'll create an input, and we'll say this ELT append child, this input. All right, and let's build this up one piece at a time so you understand exactly what all this code is about. Okay, so first of all, let me put in the selection list. Okay, and whenever this gets changed, of course, we're hoping we're going to call this thing. We'll not even use the auto clear this time. We'll just let the old value be there. Okay, but this is so far so good. Let's check and see whether or not this is working. Okay, good. At least I can see something. Of course, what I want is when I click on this thing, I want something to appear. Well, what does it mean to make something appear? Okay, well, number one, you need to figure out what event handler in order to attach. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking I'm going to go off and I'm going to do an add event listener, and you're going to ask to do the thing called a click. Okay, well, you know what? That's fine. Sorry, let me at least do this. Console.log input is active. Okay, and let me go over here, and you click here, and you can see that yes, the input is definitely active. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to reload the page, and I simply want to hit the tab key. And you notice that when I hit the tab key, this input is now active, but of course I haven't seen the event because, well, I haven't clicked there because, well, I've registered a handler for the click function, not just because the cursor got in there. If you wanted to be able to deal with somebody using a tab key to reach, what you want is something called focus in. And what this is an event that happens when focus is actually moved into this particular location, keyboard or otherwise. Okay, so we got there. That was one way. The other way is if you click, that also takes the focus. So clicks, of course, are useful because that's often what people are using, but sometimes people use keys, and if you want to be able to deal with simply that the input is now grabbing the actual keystrokes, it's called focus. Okay, so we're going to use the focus option this time. All right, I'm not going to do a console.log. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a brand new function called start item list. Okay, and what of course this means is I want to see an item list. So let's have a function called start item list, and let's see if we can figure out what on earth to put into an item list. Okay, so once again, back to my model here, and let's start typing a letter. Okay, so you can see that a whole bunch of things have appeared. So what are these things? Well, hey, you know what? It's a rectangular area. We know rectangular areas as simply being divs. So what I'm going to do is if somebody ends up uh, starting to focus, I'm going to make myself a div. Okay, so, well, let's have a variable. So what do we call it? Well, how about if I call it the item list? Well, let's go off to the document and say, let's create a brand new element, which happens to be a div. And, well, let's put at least something into the div so we can actually see it. So item list dot, we'll say inner text is equal to, well, we'll start with the word blah, just so we've got something to appear. Okay, and of course there will be things that we want to put in this. Sorry, I'm just looking at a second monitor here to see what's going on. Okay, well, let's actually try this. And of course, the other thing that we want to do is, well, we need to make the thing actually appear. Okay, so, well, how do we make something appear? Well, let's start by saying this else dot append child, just like we did before, and we'll make the item list. Okay, and that should make something happen. All right, let's save this, go over here, and let's reload and see if I've just got a complete mess. Okay, good. You can actually see that the word blah happened to appear. So when I clicked here, there's a brand new div that appeared with the word blah. Now you're going to say, well, the style is kind of gross. Okay, well, fine. We can go back. We can make a little bit of stuff. If we wanted to, we could always go to an item list, and you could go to, say, something called a class list, and you can add what's known as a well, let's call it a hint list. Okay, so what this is like going in and saying something like this: div class equals hint list. Okay, that's what I'm trying to emulate right here. And all that I'm going to do is over on my HTML side, let's add a new style section. And let's have something called a hint list. And, well, let's make some obvious things. We'll make a border 1 pixel solid red, just so the thing really stands out. And now you can see that this thing is here. And if you want it to be not so wide, then fine, set a width. We'll set it equal to 200 pixels. Okay, so now when I click here, you can see now I've got this blah option. Okay, now, of course, that's just a couple of pieces of, or that's just one piece of text. Let's see what else we can do. Okay, now in order to make this a little bit more interesting, rather than just having a single piece of text, what would be really nice is if I had a whole bunch of elements inside that I could click on. Okay, well, what does that mean to be able to click on things? Well, if I want a whole bunch of elements, again, let's go back and take a look at my list. Okay, type the word J. What do you see? Now, initially you might say, well, I see a big rectangle right here, but you know what I see? I see inside here another rectangle, and another rectangle. So it's a div, but inside there's actually a whole bunch of divs. So here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I need to have like some kind of a test value. So let's have this as the options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some options. Okay, let's call it red, green, and blue. These glue. Okay, let's call it blue. So there's some options. So here's what I want to do is I don't want to just hard-code the word blah. So let's say IT of options. So IT of options, so that'll be each of those things. And what I want to do is each one of these things, I want to create this. You know what, I don't like let's call it OP, because I'm going to use IT for, no, we'll call it entry. Okay, so let's create an entry, and we'll say document create element, and here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new div. And inside the entry inner text, I'm going to put OP, because that'll be the names of those different colors that I just threw in there a second ago. And of course, what am I going to do? Well, for each one of these things, I'm now going to take the entry and I'm going to add it to the item list. So I'm going to say item list dot append child entry. Okay, so now you see what I'm doing. Let's get rid of this one. So now my item list doesn't just contain just some inner text, but my item list now contains divs which contains the inner text. Okay, let's go take a look at this and see if I've got what I hope I've managed to get. Okay, reload the page and now load this up, and it says options is not defined of options. Oh, sorry, I forgot this has to be this options. Over here, reload, and take a look at this. Now I've got those 3 strings all set up. Okay, so if you want some different formatting, no problem. Change the formatting. You want some highlighting around these, by all means, just go ahead and add it. We can try that in a few minutes if this video doesn't get too long. Okay, but of course now what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to click, say, on green, and I want the word green to appear up here. So how would we accomplish this? Well, you know what? That is going to be an on-click event for the word entry. Okay, so what does it mean? Okay, well, we've already got this thing called entry, so let's go to entry and let's add exactly the same thing we did a few seconds ago called add event listener. So which event listener would you like? Well, let's force everybody to use the mouse. Okay, so here we go, and here's our function, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this pick element. Okay, pick element, that's going to be a new function which I haven't actually written yet, but now we're going to write it. Okay, so pick element, here we go. All right, once again, do you remember there is a global variable called event? Okay, so let's just do a console.log event. So console.log event, so based on which thing I click on, I should be able to figure out from the event. All right, let's find out whether or not things are working. Do I actually see an event? Good. When I clicked on green, it said mouse event. And do you see anything about the word green in here? Well, one of the things, if you remember, was something called a target. And the target, of course, happens to be the thing that contains the word green. So that's the actual div element. So here's what I'm going to do. The actual element that I picked up is called the event target. And here's what I'm going to do. Let me get this thing called selected value, just so I've got a variable. I'm going to go to event target, and I'm interested in the thing called enter text. And I'm just going to console.log selected value. Okay, just so you can see what this looks like. So now when I click this thing open and I click on blue, perfect, I see exactly the word blue. Let's reload the page, click on this, click on green. Okay, that's exactly what we want. Now, notice that I keep refreshing the page each time. Why? Well, let's take a look at this. When I click on this and I say green, that's fine. And if I click on this again, what happens? Whoa, hey, what's going on? It looks like I've got some nasty things going on, because every time that I click here, okay, whenever I leave focus and I gain the focus, I keeps adding yet another one of those main div lists. So I need some way of preventing that from occurring. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to do. All right, first of all, I'm going to have this extra thing up here called IsOpen. And I'm going to start off the word false. So IsOpen is false. When I start this thing and I append this, I'm going to say that this is open is now true. And right at the beginning, I'm going to ask the question, if this is open, what do I want to do? I want to do absolutely nothing. I just want to get out of here because it's already got one of these divs. All right, so let's try this again. Good, it appears once. If I leave and come back in again, at least it's no longer creating that same list. Okay, so that's an improvement. That's a considerable improvement. Okay, so at least it doesn't keep going back and adding. Now, the other thing that would be very useful, of course, is once you pick the element, okay, once you come down here and you say, I want the green one, oops, sorry, it actually should pick green, but guess what? This whole thing should vanish. So how on earth do you make this thing vanish? Well, it turns out it's not very difficult. But you see right here, I need a couple small changes. This item list was a local variable. And of course, at the end, I don't have access to it anymore. But rather than making a local variable, I'm going to make it a class variable called ItemList. And now I'm going to be talking about this item list, and this item list, and this item list. Okay, and down here, when I'm finished and I want to get rid of everything, all that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this item list, and I just have to call the function called remove. And what that does is that will delete, that goes to the item list and it says, please get rid of yourself. Okay, and of course, well, here's the important thing. Is it open anymore? And the answer is no, now it's not open. And if I don't clear this, you're not going to be able to open up the second time. All right, so let's see what we've got. We've got an SS list. Okay, what did I type there? There's the SS list. Oh, that was kind of funny. Okay, this item list add. Okay, all right, here we go, and item add. Now, what did I end up missing? Oh, I see. I got all kinds of nasty things that have happened. Okay, now I see what that's from. Okay, this class list. All right, here we go. So now we've got this. If I go and I pick the word blue, it did pick the word blue, and it has now disappeared. Now I can pick a different color. Okay, perfect. So now I can get the different things. All right, let's do another refactoring to make this a little bit better. When we pick the element, not only do we want to just console.log, in fact, we're probably not interested in console.logging at all. What we really want is we want the value to appear. So let's say this input value is equal to the selected value. Okay, so now if we come up here and we click on green, it actually puts the word green in here. Come down to blue, it'll change whatever is there to whatever value we're looking for. Okay, so just give me 1 second because I need to pause this, which means I'm probably going to end up having to restart another video, but just give me a second. I've got to take a break for a second. I'm back again. Okay, so listen, I just want to show one final part of this. It's just a couple of seconds. It will probably help you with some stuff if you're doing web page development. Take a look at my drop-down list right now. At the moment, it's not a very big list, so there's a couple of things I'd like to be able to do with this. First of all, you'll notice that my inputs were hard-coded. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to be passing things in here, so what I'm going to do is instead of hard-coding the values in here, it would certainly make a lot more sense if I said this options is equal to OPS, and I take this, and instead of passing it in here, I could pass it in when I actually create my list. Okay, so let's make the array down here. We'll call it 1, 2, 3. Okay, with that. Okay, and of course now I can reuse this for a whole bunch of things. Now you can imagine, take a look at this. When you click here, notice what happens. This window appears and everything else slides down, which is fine if that's what you want. But can you imagine if this was like a list of all the countries in the world? Now we're talking like several hundred things appearing, and all of the other things end up going down off the screen. Definitely not going to be a very pleasant looking effect. What would probably be a lot better? First of all, notice this. If I lose my focus, wouldn't it be nice if this would also disappear? Okay, let's fix that one too. So sort of an unexpected consequence. Okay, so how on earth would we do this? This is actually pretty simple. Let's go and register a new event listener, and we'll call it FocusOut. Okay, and what are we going to do on a FocusOut? Well, I could say this stop item list. Okay, which would actually make the whole thing disappear, or you could even write the code directly. Let's make it as an extra function. Okay, stop item list. Okay, what do we need to do to make this thing go away? Well, we did it down here. All we have to do is just take the list item and say, well, please remove it. And of course, while we're here, sorry, I'm jumping around too much. Let's do both things at the same time. We also have to mark that the open is no longer open. So let's see if this at least solves that problem. Here it is, and if I click somewhere else, at least now it's out of focus, and if I hit tab, it's also out of focus, so that's good. Okay, but I'd like to fix this problem where everything below the window or below the div ends up sliding. And now, in theory, this should be something covered in your CSS HTML course, but I know there's a lot of other things going on in that course, so that was probably ended up not happening. All right, there's a bunch of things called positioning. And generally, you end up, if you don't say otherwise, you end up using something called relative. But I'm going to show you something here called absolute. Okay, take a look at this. Just adding one extra word. Let's go take a look at my list of things now when I click. Notice that now the item is appearing, but it seems to be appearing kind of merged together. But notice that the word output and everything else below is not shifted down. This is kind of half solving our problem, except I can't read anything because, well, everything is merged together. Well, you know what? It would be a very simple fix. All that I need to do is if I go and I set the background color to, say, white, that should end up solving my problem. So at least now I've got myself a little pop-up window, and now it will obscure at least the stuff behind. And when I go and I pick something, it, well, hang on, how come that didn't work? Okay, so looks like I've got at least a little bit of work here ahead of myself, because now my values have completely vanished. Uh-oh. And now, does that mean it's actually there? No, it looks like it's gone. Uh-oh. Was that some of my refactoring? Okay, let's see if we can figure out what I ended up doing. I ended up saying remove. I said the value is here. Console.log. This, let's say, selected value. Make sure everything here is still going. Yeah, it looks like FocusOut. Okay. I believe that it has to do now with my FocusOut business. Okay, so there's our problem. Okay, so unfortunately, here is the problem as you start clicking on things. Because I removed the item as part of the focus out, it ended up removing the item before this event actually had a chance to pick up the value. Whoops. Okay, so there was a bit of a surprise. Now, do I want to go off and try to explain this one, or do I just want to let this one be and leave this as one of those fun exercises for students to go off and try? Okay, well, you know what? Give me a couple of minutes. I'll stop this video and yet make a second one, so I decide which order I actually want to solve this. Because like anything else, there's several different ways how to solve the problem. So give me a couple minutes. And I'm back. Sorry, that took a couple of minutes to look up exactly how this should be done. So just to remind you exactly what the problem here is. So our current situation is that I can click here to pick up the focus, and I can see these values. If I click somewhere else, the focus disappears, which now everything is removed, just like we wanted. But if I come down here to 3 with 3 E's and try clicking, I'm not getting any response. Okay, even though I am certainly console.logging the event down here. So what's happening? Okay, here's the problem. Okay, so first of all, we said when the focus out happens, get rid of the list. Okay, so well, let's come back over here. See, the list is here, and what happens when I click on this thing? Well, this loses focus, and the instant that it loses focus, it also gets rid of everything. So by the time that the focus is final, or by the time that the mouse click event has happened, that dialog or that little pop-up div that we saw, that's now just completely gone. So there's a small trick. There was 2 tricks that I found. One suggestion was, well, rather than calling this stop item list directly, you could put a small delay, like 20-30 milliseconds, and then have it disappear. I don't really like that approach, but it would probably work in most cases. Instead, I want to make a change to this start item list over here for the event listener called click. I'm going to switch it over and I'm going to call it mouse down. And if you remember the difference between a mouse down versus a click is actually when you finally click the entire thing and let go of the mouse button. This mouse down will happen immediately as soon as you press the mouse button on just on the down. Okay, so the result is, if we come over here, we still have our focus in and out, making the div appear and disappear, but this time when I click here, the first handler that happens to be the mouse down, and that actually picks up the value, so that's quite a bit better. Now there's just one final thing that I want to cover. In a lot of these autocomplete inputs, you'll notice that there's a little bit of suggestion here so that you know exactly which one you're which one you're clicking on, and you can see here this has got some white background, some blue background, some white foreground. If you wanted to be able to make use of this, there's actually some very clever little CSS tricks. Now take a look at this. What do I have? I have a div inside a hint list. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add a new style. So I've got this thing called a hint list, and inside here I'm talking about the divs inside the hint list. But of course I don't want to apply a style to all of them. I only want to apply the ones that are actually being hovered. Okay, what would I like to do? Well, let's set the background color to blue, and let's set the foreground color to, well, we'll pick white. Okay, and now take a look at this. You see, this does exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so we're simply using CSS tricks to be able to do things, and of course you can apply whatever other styles you want. Okay, so that makes that that drop-down list look a little bit more interesting and a little bit closer to what we've seen. Now, what about if you wanted to be able to have things so that as you start typing THRE and it would get these things out? Okay, well this is quite a bit more work. A good exercise for you to try. I won't make you do it, but certainly encourage you to give it a shot. What you'd want to do is every keystroke, you'd simply want to be looking up in the list values inside the list that happen to match. So if you type the letter T, you'd want to provide everything that starts with the letter T. Okay, so the value 1 would disappear, 2 and 3 would both appear because it's what you've typed so far. So you'd start shortening up the list. That is quite a bit more work. There's reasons why this jQuery UI, these are quite popular, because guess what? It does a lot of things for you, and it does exactly these types of things. Okay. All right, so that's the next thing. Now, what do I want to give? Okay, give me a second. I will put together a description of the next exercise. It's going to be our final exercise for the day. Okay, so right back. And here is the final part of this video. And this is the exercise I'm going to leave you to work on. Okay, so you see what I've done here. So this is part number 4. It says create something called a hint list buttons. It's because I call it initially hint list instead of selection list. I'll use this name hint list. Hint list was buttons. And the way this is going to work is it's going to be an input, or it's going to be an input area that has an input plus 3 buttons. A button with a less than symbol, a button with a greater than symbol, and a star. Okay, and the way it's going to work is the greater than button is going to show you the next value in the list, the less than is going to show you the previous value in the list, and finally the star button is going to actually pick the value. Now, the easiest thing to do is to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so down here, you see what I've done is I've created this thing called a hint list buttons, and I've passed in the values 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm not going to show you my hint list buttons. This is for you to actually solve, but I will show you the actual output. Okay, so here we go. When I load up the page, you'll see what I'm showing is I'm showing the very first item that I put called the number 1, and you'll see that there's 3 buttons. There's a star button to actually make it go. There's the greater than button, which will bring me to the next value. Now the next value happens to be 2, so if I click here, I go forward to 2. If I click this one, I'd go back to 1. If I click forward twice, it'll bring me over to 3. If I click it twice, it brings me back to 1. It will not crash if I try to go too far past the beginning, and likewise if I go too far past the end, it'll ignore that. And finally, if I click on the star button, you'll see that it actually changes the output. Okay, so here's a 1 selected, and now it's picked up here. Okay, so I want you now to go off and actually do this one. Yes, this one will be a little bit of a challenge, so I'm not going to give you anything further for the day. That's probably enough to keep you entertained for a good little bit of time. Okay, also no solution for this one. If you want the solution, you're going to have to work for it. Okay, all right, so that's all for the day. Here's a bit of a hint in advance. You definitely want to have these types of things that we did today, the flexible inputs, the auto input, the button stuff, including this hint list buttons. You want all of these things done for tomorrow's lab exercise. So these things will be coming back tomorrow, and what we're going to do is we're going to make use of this in a larger program. Okay, so get ready for tomorrow's lab. So just like what we've done before, there will be 2 submissions for the lab, the one at the end of the class, followed by a second shot if you didn't get everything finished. Okay, so see you tomorrow.